image, and being a former broadcaster, that's probably not unsurprising. I'm really grateful for those little recap moments that they have at the start of your Netflix and Neon series, because it's funny when you just brought it up. I couldn't think of a series in particular, but then I do find myself when I am binging, I'm not actually as engaged in the series as I think I am.
Interesting.
I'm sort of watching it and it's on, but I'm not really taking it in.
Well, speaking of taking it in, let's take in a bit more wild for sound, because we love it this afternoon. You've both been wonderful. Kia ora to you, Sarah Sparks, and kia ora to you, Scotty Campbell. Lovely to have you on the program. I'm Wallace Chapman, 3:45. Stay tuned for more on the protests outside Parliament. See you tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei fiery scenes at Parliament as protesters, their toilets and gazebos are cleared out. Tents are set alight and offices are pelted with projectiles. Some protesters have armed themselves with homemade shields, fire extinguishers and tent poles, and reportedly laid trip wires. Russia is increasingly isolated as the US bans its aircraft from American airspace and squeezes its economy harder. Calling all amateur detectives, we need your help tracking down a bunch of Kiwi boys who were on their OE more than 5 decades ago. How much is the humble cauliflower worth to you? $5? $10? How about 15 big bucks?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The police have retaken Parliament grounds in a massive operation that started at 6 this morning and carried on all day. The lawn's now being cleared of protesters' tents for the first time in 23 days. However, hundreds of people are still milling around on nearby streets. A short time ago, the police turned fire hoses on the crowd, some of whom have thrown rocks and bricks and one a hammer. Jimmy Ellingham reports.
Violent clashes erupted this afternoon as police officers in riot gear made a determined effort to clear the grounds. Some protesters threw objects like chairs, pieces of wood and traffic cones, while others appealed for calm. At one point, a tent burst into flames, sending thick black smoke billowing into the air. Many tents have been removed, and the police say 38 people have been arrested and 30 vehicles moved.
Another tent has since been set alight under a tree outside the grounds near the cenotaph, and trees along the Bowen Street side of Parliament were also set on fire. Protesters have also been forced back down Molesworth Street, which has largely been cleared as well. More arrests are being made at the foot of the street, and armed police are on standby inside Parliament. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, is due to speak on the situation at 5:30. The American president says Russia's war on Ukraine has misfired. In his first State of the Union speech to Congress, Joe Biden said Vladimir Putin has been surprised by the resolve of Ukraine, but also by that of the global community.
Countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, even Switzerland, are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated.
US officials and some academics believe the invasion is being slowed by low fuel, food and morale. However, the southern city of Kherson has reportedly fallen to Russian forces. A member of the local council says many civilians have died.
Now it's really panic, and we have many people who died. Civil people, not troops, maybe 200 people who died now.
Earlier in Kiev, a rocket attack on the country's largest TV tower killed 5 people. The daily number of COVID community cases has broken yet another record. 22,152 have been reported today. 405 people are in hospital with the virus, up from 373 yesterday, and 10 of those are in intensive care. The total number of active cases is now just under 124,000. The police and customs have made New Zealand's largest ever seizure of methamphetamine at the border, intercepting a shipment of 613 kilograms with an estimated retail value of $245 million. As part of the operation, investigators executed several search warrants in Auckland yesterday, arresting 6 people. The police say some have links to the Comanchero gang. All face serious drug and money laundering charges. Former rugby league star Manu Vatuvei has been jailed for importing methamphetamine. In the Manukau District Court today, the 35-year-old was sentenced to 3 years and 7 months. He had a hand in 2 imports of meth, one of them involving nearly half a kilogram of the drug, hidden in skipping rope handles. Vatuvei's lawyer, Vivian Fayen, told the court he deeply regrets what he did.
My client is genuinely and deeply regretful and remorseful for his actions and is disgraced. He has fallen from grace, not a little but a long way.
Vatuvei's brother, Lupini Mafi, who had a larger role in the crime, has been jailed for 7 years and 2 months. Now to sport, and the start of the inaugural Super Rugby Aupiki competition has been delayed. It was due to kick off on Saturday, but increasing numbers of COVID cases among the 4 franchises, the Blues, Chiefs, Manawa, Hurricanes Paua and South Island combined side Matatu, has meant it's been postponed. Sports editor Stephen Hewson has more.
The Blues have been most affected, meaning they're unable to field a team this weekend. New Zealand Rugby hopes the competition can now kick off on March 10th, with the winner decided by points accrued during round-robin play, with no final to now be held. NZR's General Manager Chris Lendrum says teams will still relocate to their Taupō bubbles this week as planned, and the Chiefs, Hurricanes and Matatu will now play a game of 3 halves on Saturday.
Meanwhile, Moana Pacifica have named 11 Super Rugby debutants for their inaugural match in Super Rugby Pacific against the Crusaders in Dunedin on Friday night. Moana Pacifica's debut in the competition comes in round 3 after their first 2 games were postponed following a COVID outbreak in their squad. And a decision about banning Russian athletes from the Winter Paralympics will be made tomorrow. Competition is due to begin this weekend, and the full Ukraine squad has confirmed it will compete in Beijing. The Russian team has already arrived. The International Paralympic Committee says any decision will be open to legal challenge. That's the news.
Police and protesters face off.
I'm watching 10 people take down a big marquee. There's just trolleys making their way down the hill and out of the occupation.
As I'm talking, there are about 100 police standing around. Police have put out statements encouraging people who want to leave the protest in their cars. They'll give them help to get out if they need to.
There appears to be some pepper spray as well being used. There's plenty of protesters now heading towards the water fountain outside the front of the Court of Appeal to clean their eyes.
Live as it happens, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, partly cloudy, isolated showers becoming confined to Northland this afternoon, fine tomorrow apart from isolated showers about Northland and Coromandel. For Waikato to Kapiti, including the Central High Country, also for Bay of Plenty, fine. Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, a few showers becoming confined to Hawke's Bay and Gisborne this afternoon, then clearing tomorrow afternoon with fine spells increasing. For Canterbury, cloud and a few showers clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. For the remainder of the South Island, mainly fine, isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges, cloudy periods and isolated showers about Bulla and Fiordland tomorrow. And for Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers that are clearing this afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you around 5:30, depending on the announcements.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Homemade pitchforks, shields, explosions, fireballs and a big black cloud of smoke. It could be a scene from a war-torn country, but it's at the doorstep of power as the effort to remove protesters from Parliament's lawn turns seriously ugly. For the very latest, let's go to our reporter Jake McKee, who's live at Parliament. Jake, what's going on there now?
Hi Lisa, today has been absolutely extraordinary scenes. In the past couple of hours, the lawn here has turned into an absolute nightmare. We saw a fire break out, black smoke absolutely filled the air before police and other emergency services managed to get it under control. Just before we crossed over here, I actually saw just a cop being taken away, injured by ambulance staff. He was limping and he did not look like his face did not look in comfort at all. Protesters have started this fire. It managed to spread. We heard bangs that we think could have been gas bottles. People were running around saying, avoid, avoid, get out of there, gas bottles. You could see gas warmers in there, that, you know, the outside ones. And these are what had been in there. People obviously just weren't thinking about it. But people were actually throwing into these fires. And every time a bang was going off, people would cheer. And so the protesters, whilst this was a massive risk, did not seem to care too much. And the people were throwing things are getting broken, police managed to move their line forward, but as they're moving, people are breaking down their property to try and, one, remove it from the site, but also use it as a weapon. Tent poles were being thrown at officers and beyond them like javelins. This was not a kind or calm scene down here this afternoon. The protest here has only turned violent.
It's this kind of behaviour the police commissioner says forced them to act. Push and shove between protesters and police. Then pull and shove. A police officer is hurled to the ground, swallowed up by an angry band of protesters, pulled by his fluoro yellow vest, separated from his line of officers. The anger from demonstrators palpable. The police commissioner saying enough is enough. The de-escalation approach out the window. Protesters have been here for 3 weeks, police choosing today to finally move them on. They made their move before dawn broke on Parliament's lawn, slowly, methodically and with force, retaking the city streets that have been blockaded behind this protest for 23 days. About 6 a.m, police moved in. Move, 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 they boomed, pushing the protesters down the road. Adding to the chaos, a repeated message over loudspeaker. If you do not leave the area, you are trespassing. Police stand in riot gear, but protesters are geared up too. Homemade weapons and shields brought to the front line, pitchforks, road cones and rubbish thrown at police and fire extinguishers used to repel them. Paint thrown at officers, pepper spray at protesters, many pouring milk on their eyes to stop the sting.
The operation is the result of significant planning and the commitment of several hundred staff from around the country. This morning, you will have seen we have urged protesters who have not already departed to leave now. Our message to those who do not wish to be caught up in our operation is please go home.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announcing a review.
I would be concerned about anything that feels like it's distancing itself from the public, but at the same time some basic measures to ensure that we can access the building and that staff can access the building safely.
Tensions only increased this afternoon, black smoke blanketing the air outside the seat of power. Sirens screaming, tents on fire, chaos. Then fire officers with hoses, bringing the fire under control. The fight and the protest still there.
And Jake joins us again now. Jake, in terms of the police operation, what actually has happened today?
Well, we've seen 38 people arrested so far. That was the latest figure we have. And there's been about 30 cars that have actually been towed away from this site. Police finally picking up that action after first threatening it in the first week. Now, the lawns of Parliament here, police have swarmed through there. And as you can see, if you're watching, absolutely littered with smithereens of tents. It has absolutely destroyed the property in here. Parliament lawn looks nothing like it would have 3 weeks ago. The playground that Parliament put in, costing $500,000, that was caught in the fire, damage gone. And now we have seen, just while my package was playing there, more officers and emergency services staff carried away injured, one carried away in a stretcher by 6 fire and emergency staff. So the pretty picture here is not pretty at all.
And what about the size of the footprint of the protest?
It's drastically shrunk today. Seems to be police's big push that they really wanted to get across today. It was up until about midday. It seemed a lot of movement had made. Sorry, we just heard a very big bang behind us. I'm not too sure what that was. But up until about midday, not too much ground was made. They had cleared the northern end of Molesworth Street and Hill Street. But it's what's happened since 3 o'clock. That is the massive change. Molesworth Street cleared. We look out there now, definitely not open to traffic, but it is cleared. I'm not too sure what's happening behind me. I'm not sure if you can hear, but there are multiple bangs going off me and I can hear multiple people wailing. It doesn't sound positive, but this thing is nowhere near ended. We had a couple of lingering hours today where we weren't too sure what's happened, but these past few hours, this has turned to absolute brutality and chaos. The police are going up against violent protesters now. These people out there are not happy at all. And so whilst police have made ground and Parliament lawn is cleared of the protesters, this is by no means going to be over soon.
Thanks, Jake, and we will speak to the police around 5:30. That will be live. And now let's hear from Jimmy Allingham, as our reporter, who is also near Parliament. Jimmy, what is the situation where you are?
Yeah, good evening. I'm standing on Bowen Street behind the War Memorial outside the grounds of Parliament, and things have calmed down a little bit now, but a few minutes ago there were some protesters here throwing missiles at the police, including bottles. I couldn't see what else they were throwing, and the police there's a line of police here with riot shields fending them off. Police then walked down from the parliamentary lawn towards the protesters, aiming a hose at them, and that seemed to calm things down a little bit. There were some minor scuffles near Bowen Street in front of me as well.
So while we were talking to Jake, we could hear some loud bangs in the background. Any idea what they are or where they were coming from?
No, I heard them, but couldn't see them. They were coming seemingly from the direction of the parliamentary lawn. There were 2 loud bangs that I heard just before, but I couldn't see anything from Bowen Street.
And on the parliamentary grounds, there is an absolute wasteland of tents and bare ground there. But in terms of protesters, what are numbers like still around the area and where are they?
There are some protesters in front of Parliament, and there are also quite a few lining up against police along Bowen Street and Lambton Quay. It's a bit hard to tell at the stage too who is the protester, and there's also quite a few Wellingtonians who are just here for a look by the looks of it as well. So there's plenty of people around, and a big line of police stopping anyone getting from the end of Lambton Quay any further towards Parliament.
Thanks for the update, Jimmy. That's Jimmy Allingham live near Parliament there. And a reminder, we'll speak to the police at around 5:30. It is 16 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Russia's brutal assault on eastern Ukraine continues as fresh explosions ring out. Dozens of civilians are dead after shelling in the city of Kharkiv, while 5 people are reported to have died in an attack on the television tower in the Ukrainian capital Kiev. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands flee to the west, crossing Ukraine's borders with friendly nations. CNN's Sarah Sidner has this report.
A 15-year-old's desperate tears. She says she has just walked across the border to meet her mother, but her mother has just fainted. She has no pulse. She is not breathing. Volunteer medics from Israel rush in. They get her breathing, but she remains unconscious. She needs a hospital. It takes 30 minutes for an ambulance to arrive.
She come back? I'm going.
You saved her life. This is life on the Polish side of the border with Ukraine.
It's only women and children. They come along after 3 days in the cold.
In Poland, hope and heartbreak are everywhere as refugees pack into the country. Olga fled the country with her 9-year-old daughter, Angelina. Olga had to leave her husband behind so he could fight with whatever he could find.
It's so difficult. I cannot tell you how it's difficult, this feeling. This feeling that you lose your life, you know. And here, I don't know what to do.
She is still shell-shocked, but at least has friends to take her in.
We heard the bombs, it's like explosion, yes. And of course we watched the news and we watched that Russian soldiers are there in Kiev, in Kharkov, in Odessa, in Nikolaev, and we saw tanks, yes, and it was panic.
As night falls in the bitter cold, more heartbreak. But the Polish people are offering refugees a warm welcome, warm clothes, a warm place to stay, a warm meal, even diapers and toys for children. A grassroots effort smack in the middle of a supermarket parking lot.
Meanwhile, the US president has banned Russian aircraft from American airspace, joining Canada and the EU. At his first State of the Union address this afternoon, Joe Biden called out Russian President Vladimir Putin, saying he had underestimated the resolve of the US and its allies.
6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people.
Meanwhile, Russia has warned residents in the Ukraine capital that it's about to target technology centres after killing civilians in an attack on a TV tower. Airstrikes have also hit apartment blocks and a Holocaust memorial, and a huge convoy of Russian military vehicles continues to advance on Kiev. Joining us now from Moscow is CNN's contributor on Russian affairs, Jill Doherty. Jill, what is the situation where you are?
Well, Lisa, we're in Moscow, and it's very early in the morning. So President Biden's speech took place roughly 5 a.m. Moscow time, and we were not expecting really any official or unofficial reaction from the Kremlin at that point, and we still have not had any. But we did contact the spokesperson for the President Putin, and he said that President Putin does not, as a rule, watch, TV addresses, but he does get reports that he reads. And I think you can be quite sure that the Foreign Ministry, probably the Defense Ministry, intelligence agencies here in Russia, looked at that speech very carefully. There was a short news cut-in after the Biden speech. And interestingly, they did not engage at all. They didn't quote at all any of those personal references from President Biden about President Putin, things like dictator, Putin alone is to blame, and he is more isolated than ever. They didn't engage with those, but they did get into a few issues. You mentioned one, which is the U.S. closing the airspace to Russian planes. They also mentioned U.S. forces will not fight Russians. President Biden has been saying that a lot. It was repeated in the speech. And then finally, this intriguing thing that we probably will be hearing more of, which is the U.S. is creating a special group to investigate the dealings of Russian oligarchs, who, of course, have billions and billions of dollars. Many of them have been targeted with sanctions, but I understand that they will probably be doing more in that area. But again, the Russians not engaging on this personal basis, even though you could say that the battles in Ukraine are really President Putin's war.
So, Jill, how are local Russians responding to the invasion, and are they seeing any everyday consequences as a result of this?
If you just look at the war itself, if you are an average Russian, kind of probably a little bit older, you're watching state television, which is, controlled by the state. So you're seeing what they want you to see. And essentially, it is fighting in the eastern part of Ukraine, in those Russian-speaking breakaway areas. They're not showing very much at all, interestingly, of the attack on Kiev or some of the bigger cities of Ukraine. Now, if you're a younger version, you're seeing quite a different picture, because most young people here in Russia, as around the world, are not watching television. They're on the internet, and they're getting many other sources of information. As you probably know, there have been protests here in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, and cities across the nation. Some 6,000, more than 6,000 people have been arrested or detained, and really it's across the country. There also has been some criticism, from other groups. There's a university which is allied with the foreign ministry. Some of those, more than 1,000 members of that faculty and students, gave an open letter to President Putin asking for the war to stop. So there is a little bit of pushback. It's still, I would say, minor compared to the, overall population, but it is significant, and it does appear to be growing.
Jill, what is Putin's strategy here? We have been watching this convoy of Russian military resources heading towards Kiev, and it seems to have stalled. Any idea of what the issue is?
One of the things that the Russians did was some of these troops that are going into the city are getting ahead of their supply lines. And so they have not been able to get sometimes gas, fuel, petrol in time, and other supplies. So sometimes they're literally, our crews, CNN crews, have been reporting that you can see them alongside the road sometimes, stopped. So that could be explaining that. It's not clear precisely what they want to do. There is one theory that the Russians plan to encircle Kiev, the capital. But you'd have to say that, as Biden said tonight, and I think most objective observers would agree with this, the plan that the Russians had to very quickly take over Ukraine obviously is not working. And there is a sense of frustration here in the government, quiet as it is, that this is not going according to plan.
Thank you for your time this evening. That's Jill Doherty, CNN's contributor on Russian affairs. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Let us know your thoughts on the confrontation here at home. That's in the grounds of Parliament as the police move to remove the protesters, and also your thoughts on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Pātui mai, text us 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The man known as the Beast, beloved by league fans up and down the country, is now confined to a jail cell. Manu Vatuvei, one of the greatest players in Warriors history, has been jailed for 3.5 years for importing methamphetamine hidden in skipping rope handles. His lawyer described the sports star's fall from grace, saying it's not just a little, but a long way. Jordan Bond reports.
From the highs to the lows.
Mr. Vatuvei, you are in relation to this charge convicted and sentenced to 3 years, 7 months imprisonment.
An extraordinary playing career, overshadowed by what he did next, outlined by Judge Jonathan Moses.
You have accepted your role in 2 importations, one of 487.5 grams of methamphetamine, and another importation where the quantities are unknown.
The judge noted Manu Vatuvei, better known as just Manu Vatuvei, had a tumultuous 18 months. An injury forced the now 35-year-old to retire from league, and a brain cyst ended his boxing ambitions. His marriage broke up and he had no career. He decided to help his brother Lopini Mafi import methamphetamine, which his lawyer Vivian Fayan said he deeply regrets.
My client is genuinely and deeply regretful and remorseful for his actions, and is disgraced, I think, is an appropriate description. He has fallen from grace, not a little, but a long way.
Lopini Mafi was involved in a number of other meth imports, heading up what the judge described as an unsophisticated commercial importation ring. Murphy was also jailed today for 7 years and 2 months. Judge Moses said the courts see the harm that methamphetamine causes every single day.
You have both, to varying degrees, contributed to this problem in our community by your actions of bringing commercial quantities of methamphetamine into New Zealand.
Judge Moses outlined letters from Vatuvei's family stating the publicity he'd lived under hadn't always been easy, and he had been a role model for a lot of young Pacific Islanders.
Your fall from grace is a punishment in itself.
He said Vatuvei could choose to live a better life upon release when he'll be 39 years old.
Your final legacy in the community does not have to be defined by what has happened today. It can be defined by what you choose to do from today onwards. When you are released, you will still have a lot of your life to live, and it's clear that you will have the ongoing love and support of your wider family and friends.
Vatuvei, who was on bail, was sentenced to 3 years and 7 months in prison.
And that was Jordan Bond reporting. E te iwi e haere ake nei e Checkpoint. COVID delays kick-off for yet another sports competition. Calling all amateur detectives, we need your help reuniting a bunch of travel buddies from the 70s. And cauliflower has never tasted so damn expensive. We will explain why. Homai o whakaro, send us feedback on anything on the program. Text us on 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is time now for the headlines. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
The police have reclaimed Parliament grounds nearly 12 hours after launching a major operation. Protesters set tents on fire this afternoon and threw bottles and other objects at officers who were advancing onto grounds and pushing back the protesters. The police have also reclaimed Molesworth Street, clashing with a crowd of people when they reached the bottom. However, there are still hundreds of people in the area. At least 38 people have been arrested today and face charges including trespass, obstruction, assaulting police and possessing a restricted weapon. The Energy Minister, Megan Woods, says New Zealand has agreed to release 60 million barrels of oil from emergency reserves held overseas. It's part of the international effort to stop oil prices rising as Russia invades Ukraine. Ms Woods is accusing Russia of using its position as the second largest oil exporter to weaponise energy by withholding supplies to Europe in the months before it invaded Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine's southern city of Kherson has reportedly fallen to Russian forces. A shipment of more than 600 kilograms of methamphetamine has been intercepted at the border, making it New Zealand's largest ever seizure. Several search warrants were executed in Auckland and 6 people with links to the Comanchero gang have been arrested. The seizure has an estimated retail value of $245 million. The latest COVID-19 update shows 60% of Māori have now had a booster dose, but the Ministry of Health is encouraging everyone who's eligible to get the third vaccination to protect against Omicron. Another record has been set for daily COVID community cases, with 22,152 reported today. And former rugby league star Manu Vatuvei has been sentenced to more than 3 years in jail for importing methamphetamine. His brother, Lopini Murphy, has also been jailed for 7 years and 2 months on the same charge. Those are the headlines. We'll have a full bulletin for you at 6.
Kia ora e ho, and returning to our top story, the police operation to remove the protest camp at Parliament started in the early hours of this morning and is still going. Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers joins us now. Kia ora, Richard.
Oh, kia ora, Lisa.
Right now, who is in control of Parliament grounds?
The police are.
Tell us about the operation. How many people have you moved out? What kind of resistance did you come up against?
Yeah, sure. Look, we started early this morning. Our intent was always to reclaim the public roads and restore order, and we've made magnificent progress today. Our staff have done an incredible job in very challenging circumstances. You will have seen that has been met with significant resistance and violence from some, and we are very pleased with the way that our staff have dealt with that today.
Tell me about the violence that you met. What kind of weapons were being used and how?
We've seen pitchforks, we've seen sticks and pipes. We've seen a whole range of things, not only presented at police but also thrown at police, and obviously physical violence too, which has resulted in a small number of our staff being injured. But they were given medical help straight away, and they rejoined their colleagues to continue.
How many armed police did you have at Parliament today?
I can't obviously comment, Lisa, unfortunately, on those sorts of details. But we have put a tremendous amount of planning into today, and as long as it takes to bring calm to the situation, our focus is on ensuring the safety of everybody. So, as you expect, we have options available to us to keep people safe.
But you did have armed officers at Parliament. They were observed by people inside Parliament, in fact. How concerned were you that there might be an attempt to storm Parliament?
Oh, look, as I said, Lisa, I can't comment on our tactical options in that respect, but I think the general public would appreciate that we are prepared to deal with all situations.
So you were worried that some of the protesters might make an attempt to enter Parliament?
I think what we've seen today is certainly a number of people who were intent on causing disruption and violence, and we were ready for that, and we will continue until we have calm to the situation, and police staff will continue to do a marvellous job through the night as required.
As you started this operation this morning, who did you think was down there in that group that remained?
Oh, look, I think what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is the genuine protesters who turned up to peacefully protest their cause. They departed some time ago, actually, and what we're left with was a cohort of people who had other agendas, other intent, and some of that sadly has played out today in the form of violence.
All along, the police have said that they didn't want to move in because the level of force that would be required to move the protesters out would be unacceptable to most New Zealanders. Did you move today because people's tolerance had lowered, or what was the reasoning?
Oh, you will have heard our Commissioner talk about our goal to de-escalate the situation, and we've done a lot of work over the last few weeks to do that. But there comes a point in time where actually it's time to move in and open those roads up, and sadly, use force. But the force that we've been using today has been proportionate to what has been required to bring this situation to a successful outcome in the short order.
What caused the fire that we could see burning?
A number of small fires did break out. Sadly, protesters decided that was something that they should do. We worked alongside Fire in New Zealand very quickly to bring that under control, and fortunately no injuries.
Can you describe to us, Richard, what the scene is like there now in terms of damage? Sadly, as a consequence of be it small fires or damage through the occupation over recent months, there's a fairly big clean-up job to do. But look, that's what needs to be done, and we'll work hard with other partners to make sure that happens. So the playground is ruined? Is that the case? I haven't seen the playground, Lisa, at this stage, but that's obviously that's something that down there that's obviously been in the centre of everything. So I'm not sure what its current status is. Are there any protesters in pockets still around the area, and what happens with them? Oh yes, no. Look, the police staff will continue with their marvellous work tonight to deal with any issues that do emerge. There are certainly still some people down there, but our appeal to them is please go home, do the right thing, and let's help move forward from this. How many, Richard, do you think are still there in the area? I can't comment on that at this stage, Lisa, unfortunately. I don't have that with me at the moment. What's your message to protesters camped out in other areas of the country refusing to move on the same issue? New Zealand legislation allows for peaceful protest. Everybody understands that. Our plea and our request is to please keep these things peaceful. We appreciate people's causes out there, but when it turns to what we've seen here in recent times and particularly today, that's unlawful, and we will act on behalf of all New Zealanders. Thank you for your time this evening. That's the Police Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers. The Prime Minister has just spoken about the chaos outside Parliament this afternoon, and our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch joins me now. Craig, what did Te Peremia have to say?
Hello, Lisa. Yes, the conference is still underway, but I can give you an idea of the Prime Minister's message. She said the police went into this operation expecting hostility and violence. They had planned for that, but it is another thing entirely to witness it playing out. She has described the protesters' actions as an attack on frontline police, on Parliament, and on New Zealand values. She says it was wrong, and it stands against who New Zealanders are as people. She went on to say that New Zealanders will not be defined by this act by a small handful of protesters, and described that her feelings as some of sadness, anger, but also that she felt resolute in the COVID-19 response. She also expressed her deep admiration and thanks for the frontline police, fire and emergency service workers for the work that they have carried out today.
Any comment on the extent of the damage? We saw the fire. There appears to be damage to the playground, and the area is, well, it looks like a complete tip.
Yes, still very early days and still a lot of questions to be answered about how this has played out and what sort of damage and costs there will be. Earlier in the day, we did ask the Prime Minister about that, about the cost, the quantum that taxpayers may need to stump up, and at that point, she did not have a number. Still very early days, of course, and a lot of tallying up to be done in the days ahead.
And Craig, the other thing is the reports of armed police officers cited on Parliament. Has she said anything about threats to MPs or concerns that there was going to be an attempt to storm Parliament?
No, she has not. She said that today the police will restore order and tomorrow the government will continue to work hard to get us safely back to normality. She did note that the people outside had seemed to have succumbed to misinformation and disinformation. A small subsection of society had then acted on it in a violent way, and that there would be in the future questions around what had caused that and how to deal with the underlying cause. No information on any specific threats and the like, but we do know that there will be questions for Parliament about security. Is security sufficient? We know the Speaker, Trevor Mallard, has asked his officials to look into the feasibility, for example, of setting up a fence around the complex. That would be a very different type of Parliament to the one that we have at the moment. A lot more control over who comes and goes, and a step away from that free access that the public has had for so long. Politicians would be loath to lose that, but then again, they can't afford to allow a repeat of today's carnage.
Ngā mihi mo te rā, Craig. That is Craig McCulloch, our Deputy Political Editor. Now, let's go back to the streets outside Parliament now, and our reporter Jake McKee joins us now. Jake, what's it looking like now?
Not much has changed. We've seen more and more riot police actually head out of Parliament and head down there towards the activity behind us. We constantly keep hearing these bangs. It's unclear what's happening, but my colleagues down the road, down on Lambton Quay, their photos show us that protesters have been ripping bricks out of the ground. The ground is pretty much flooded from the fires, which thankfully appear to be pretty much out, but a lot of officers still out, and they just seem to be bringing more and more out. The end of this, who knows when it's going to be.
Thanks for that, Jake. That's our reporter Jake McKee live from Parliament. It is 20 to 6. You're with Checkpoints on RNZ National, and we'll keep you updated on any more developments from Parliament as they happen. But for now, let's go to the business news. Ko taku hoa e Naianei, called Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, let's start with dairy prices. They're continuing to go up, up, up.
Yeah, much like oil at the moment. They're not the only, amongst a whole range of commodity prices which are seeing real upward pressure on those prices. The average price at the fortnightly global dairy auction rose 5.1% to $5,065 a tonne. That's after rising 4.2% at the previous auction. Now, the price of whole milk powder, that strongly influences the payout for local farmers. That was up nearly 6% to $4,757. NZX Dairy Insights Manager Stuart Davidson says even though they were expecting a good jump in prices, the result was still really surprising. They say that there's little doubt in his mind that the prices are well supported. There's a strong showing again from Asian buyers, reinforcing the idea that that there was still continued strong demand out there. To think about this in another way is Fonterra recently upgraded its forecast milk payout for the current season. They lifted the midpoint to about $9.50 per kilogram of solids. Now, that's going to see billions of dollars pumped into the economy by the way of farmers. But look, as these prices continue to rise, there is a chance we could see that forecast price be raised even further.
And Nicholas, what's the story with this Otago building company that's failed?
Yes, in Otago Homes Limited. Now, they are a franchise of Landmark Homes. They entered into voluntary administration on February 23rd. And now we spoke to Landmark Homes Chief Executive Gary Woodhouse today, and he says what happened here was the franchisee essentially ran out of money. That's after running into a number of challenges associated with material and skill shortages in the face of extreme demand for housing. Now, he says that Otago Homes had about 8 builds underway, and it was now working with affected customers and creditors include subcontractors, building suppliers, as well as tradespeople. There'll be a creditors meeting next week, but this does come after a major construction report last year did warn that smaller firms would be at risks of failing due to those rising cost pressures that were being seen in the sector.
And Nicholas, let's take a trot around the markets.
Yeah, the NZX is down 109 points to 12,089. The dollar trading at 67.7 US cents, 93.1 Australian. And Brent crude oil is up nearly 5% to $110 US a barrel.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton there with business news. A lot of you are getting in touch. Plenty of opinions on the situation at Parliament and the police operation that's been going all day. Started at dawn, is still going on, but the Deputy Police Commissioner has told us that the police are in control of the site outside Parliament. Now, Jimmy has texted us to say just saw 12 police cars full of personnel, 4 in each car, heading south to Wellington whilst I was driving Plimmerton to Paikakariki. No doubt reinforcements. Call out to our police force. Tom says, may I say congratulations to New Zealand Police for taking action against the people who are refusing to be in the team of 5 million and insist on embarrassing themselves in New Zealand. Do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101. Extreme and horrific images of child sexual exploitation on a scale never seen before. The result of a worldwide investigation led by New Zealand, which has netted hundreds of people involved in the possession and trading of online child sexual abuse material. The operation spanned 13 countries and has identified thousands of online accounts making up the enormous web of exploitation. Andrew McRae reports.
The inquiry started after a tip-off from an electronic service provider, ESP, which identified about 90,000 people using the platform to share the child abuse material. The Internal Affairs Digital Child Exploitation Team says 146 children around the world have been saved from further abuse, 6 of them in this country. 46 people have been arrested here, and some have already gone to court and been convicted. Tim Houston from Internal Affairs says the scale of the operation indicates just how significant the problem is.
The severity of the material depicted, the aspects of re-victimisation for the children depicted in the material, and also the volume of information and offending accounts that we investigated as part of this operation. So it is a significant issue.
He says the volume of cases has been much higher than in previous operations, but isn't sure if it's just the tip of the iceberg.
We do annually see generally an increase in the number of reports that we receive from the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the United States, which is probably the best indication of the levels of people interacting with this material online.
Mr. Houston says better detection methods also play a part.
At the service provider level, so if electronic service providers in the United States are using effective measures to detect this type of content on their systems, then that can obviously lead to an increase in reporting.
Eleanor Parks heads ECPAT, an NGO working to stop child sexual exploitation. She welcomes the latest enforcement operation, but says it's only dealt to a fraction of the problem.
And the questions then we have to be asking are around what circumstances led to these children being in a situation where they could be exploited in this way, and how big is this picture really?
She says many people just don't know or believe child sexual exploitation can happen here.
We think it's something that just happens overseas, but this shows how vulnerable we can be. It really is. It's all ages, it's all genders. It can happen right here. Statistically, it is often girls who are victims of this kind of thing, but boys and some of the youngest children are the ones who are exposed to the most extreme forms of abuse. And that is sadly something that's happening right within our own backyard as well.
Of those already convicted for their part in the latest investigation into the sexual exploitation of children, the maximum jail sentence was just over 5 years.
We will restore these grounds. A defiant Prime Minister has addressed media to thank the police for their efforts amid fiery and violent scenes from angry protesters at Parliament this afternoon. The situation is still ongoing, and she said she was so saddened she didn't have words to describe what was happening.
At 6 a.m. this morning, the police began an operation to clear the Parliament and surrounding area of an unlawful occupation that has gone on for 22 days. I know that in planning for that operation, the police expected there would be hostility, resistance and violence. They planned for that because that is what they and Wellingtonians have experienced for several weeks now. And while they had planned for that, it is another thing entirely to witness it. To our frontline police and emergency and fire services, you have our deep admiration and our thanks. You have been calm but resolute in trying to bring this occupation to a conclusion. It has come at great risk to your personal safety. Thank you for putting others before yourselves. We have all at times felt angry during this occupation. After all, when we're in the middle of a pandemic, have 400 people hospitalised and 20,000 people becoming sick in just one day, it's almost impossible to comprehend that people would stand opposed to efforts to slow that down and to help care for our most vulnerable. One day, it will be our job to try and understand how a group of people could succumb to such wild and dangerous mis- and disinformation. And while many of us have seen that disinformation and dismissed it as conspiracy theory, a small portion of our society have not only believed it, they have acted upon it in an extreme and violent way. That cannot stand. We have a difficult journey in front of us to address the underlying cause of what we have seen here today. But in doing so, we will never ever excuse it. It was an attack on our frontline police. It was an attack on our Parliament. It was an attack on our values, and it was wrong. And the reason it would have shaken so many to witness it is because it stands so completely against not just our response to COVID, but who we are as people. But we will not be defined by this. This pandemic will not be defined by the hard conversations we've all had these past few years. Our people will not be defined by a small handful of protesters. Our country will not be defined by the dismantling of an occupation. In fact, when we look back at this period in our history, I hope we remember one thing. Together, thousands more lives were saved over the past 2 years by your actions as New Zealanders than were on that front lawn of Parliament today. The sacrifices we were all willing to make to look after one another, that is what will define us.
And in breaking news, armed police have been seen leaving Parliament and moving onto the streets of Wellington. And returning to Parliament now, we are joined by our political reporter, Katie Scotcher. Katie, what's happening where you are?
Kia ora, Lisa. I'm at the intersection of Whitmore Street and Lambton Quay. For the last 5-10 minutes, teams of protesters have been running up to the concrete barricade here and hurling bricks, cones, anything they can find at police. Police are standing guard and using their shields to protect themselves from the objects that they're throwing. The protesters have spent maybe the last hour cutting up these bricks from the ground just outside the gates to Parliament. They've kind of collected them in an organised way so they can all hurl them at once at the police.
Katie, the Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers has told us that the police have control of the parliamentary precinct. I mean, how many, have you got any idea of how many of these protesters are still wafting around the outer streets?
I would probably guess maybe 200 to 300. Certainly in the last hour or two, I've watched as the police have crossed over Parliament's lawn. Obviously, that was aided by the numerous fires that were set off. So police have gained significant ground. They're kind of circling almost. The protesters have kind of been captured in this kind of one block of Wellington, but I definitely guess that there are roughly 200 to 300 here.
And vehicles, are they still littering the place?
Not as many. Actually, you would have just heard a loud bang. I'm not sure exactly what that is. We've kind of been hearing them go off sporadically. But yeah, cars have kind of been, oh, there's another one. Cars have kind of been trickling out all afternoon, maybe 2 or 3, but certainly the numbers that we were seeing for the last 3 weeks, the street is much clearer.
And what have you seen down at the grounds of Parliament? I mean, how would you describe the damage there now that the protesters have been cleared out of that area?
It's extraordinary. Normally the lawn there is this, beautiful green kind of, lawn. There is rubbish littered over it. It kind of reminds me of a rubbish tip. There's kind of remnants of the fires that were lit earlier. There is stuff everywhere, kind of trampled tents, just, random bits of rubbish. It's a complete mess.
Thanks for the update, Katie. That's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher there. It is 7 minutes to 6, and let's take a complete change in direction. You know the saying, every picture tells a story, but sometimes it's only the first few chapters and you're left desperate to know how it ended. Well, that's exactly the deal for Canadian Keith McLaren. In 1970, he snapped a photo of a bunch of Kiwis he met on an OE, an adventure that took them through Egypt and beyond. In the photo, 5 Kiwis are sitting or leaning nonchalantly on a stone pillar fence, decked out in Chelsea boots and turned-up jeans. There was one very distinctive striped jumper with a large tiki on the front. The 6th person in the photo is an American. Now, on Checkpoint, we love an amateur detective story, and more than 5 decades later, Keith is keen to track these blokes down.
I was taking a Russian passenger liner from Athens to Beirut, and I didn't realize the ship stopped off in Alexandria, Egypt, and on board were these 5 New Zealanders, and that they were traveling down to South Africa, right? And we became, familiar sort of when we were talking on the ferry, and they told me, he says, "Why don't you stay on? Why don't you come with us for a while, and then you can catch this boat when it comes around again." By the time it came around again, we were far up the Nile and gone, and boy, did we have a lot of adventures along the way. We went through Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Kenya. We weren't together all the time. It was just sort of like off and on, but a considerable amount of it was, right? And then they took off from Kenya and went down to South Africa, and I never saw them again.
So I'm looking at this wonderful photo. I'm picking that you took it, Keith, and there's the 5 Kiwis looking like something out of a men's magazine today even, and their turned-up jeans and their Chelsea boots and a rather distinctive Kiwi jersey on one of them. What can you tell me about them? What do you remember? Do you remember their names or any other clues you might have to who they are?
Not really. I mean, it was 50 years ago. The only reason I have their names, I could remember a couple of them, but I kept a diary through that time, and I had letters I had written to my parents, and I'd written all their names down, and their names were Craig, Carrie, Mike, Dick, and Ray. And that's all I know. I don't know their last names. I just know they came from New Zealand. They were a lot of fun. They were a pretty tight group of guys. They were well prepared for what we were about to get into. I wasn't. I mean, I was traveling from Canada. I think I still had a sheepskin coat, which I think I mailed home from Egypt. And I had a sleeping bag that was good for like 40 below or something like that, which didn't do me a lot of use in Africa. But they had tents and everything. They were really, put together. And it was good to be with them, especially when we hit Cairo the first time, because I'd never been in a city like that. I mean, I don't know, there's like about 5 or 6 million people there, and it is just massive humanity. And I really didn't have that much travel experience, so it was like safety in numbers to be with these guys. Just getting onto buses with your backpack and everything, you could watch each other and stuff, and it was really good.
What makes you want to find these guys now, Keith?
It's funny. I hadn't really thought about them for a long time, but my kids wanted my wife and I to start writing some memoir type stuff of our earlier years and stuff. So I started writing this story about this long trip that I did, and started looking at the notes, the diaries, and saw these guys' pictures and stuff, and just started, just a bit of a laugh. I said, I wonder if these guys are still around, and and if there was any way of contacting them. And my daughter, who's just a wizard at finding stuff like this, she just said, okay, give me the backstory and give me the picture. And she went on Facebook and went to, I think it was Remember Christ Church, and then you guys picked it up, and here I am. What do I want out of it? Maybe just say hi, share some pictures, see what happens. Maybe they don't even remember me. I don't know. It's pretty funny.
I've looked at your Instagram. You look like you're still a pretty, you're a big adventurer, Keith. Would you come here if you found them?
Oh, geez, that might happen. I'd certainly give it a thought, that's for sure.
Yeah, strange times. Well, we've got someone...
I'd love to come down there. My neighbour's in New Zealand. Yeah.
Can't get far away from us, Keith. We're everywhere.
No, you can't. And when I was traveling, I ran into New Zealanders probably more than I did anybody. They were like doing a grand tour, before they took on life at home or something. I don't know what, but it was always refreshing to run across these guys and gals.
So, a shout out, Keith, to these 5 guys. What would you like to say to them? If they hear this, and we're going to put the photos up, what would you like to say?
I'd just say, hi, guys. It's been 50 years. Let's get together. Let's do a Skype call or something, and it'll be great to talk to you and share some stories.
Keith McLaren there. Now go to our webpage to see the photo of the Kiwi 5 and other photos that Keith took during their adventures. There's also a snap of Keith back in the day, so hopefully one of the boys will recognise that. So Mike, Dick, Ray, Craig, Kerry, you know who you are. Do get in touch and email us if any of you know who they are. Email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We would love to hear from you because Keith would love to hear from them. Now let's get to some of your feedback before the news on the protest. Grace says, I'm baffled by the fact that there are people turning Wellington upside down and injuring police when over in Ukraine people are really having to fight for their freedoms. Get some perspective, says Grace. While this person says dealing with the protesters has been old school bully tactics. People will leave hurt, more damaged and some probably radicalised. Mediation and understanding would help create a better outcome. On the other hand, John reckons when you start burning stuff, then it's time for tear gas. No more tolerance. And another listener says on what comes after the protest, Beth reckons the clean-up bill should be sent to all protesters in Christchurch, Picton and Auckland. Back after 6, we'll have more.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou, ko Iwi Ashton tēnei. The police have reclaimed Parliament grounds 23 days after protesters set up camp there. In a major operation today, officers in riot gear forced the occupiers off the grounds, removed their tents and also cleared nearby Molesworth Street. The police operation is not over, however. They're now battling with a crowd of protesters across from Parliament at the end of Lambton Quay, where bricks and poles are being hurled at officers. Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers says today's operation started early this morning with the intent of reclaiming public roads and restoring order. He told Checkpoint it was met with significant violence from some of the protesters.
Pitchforks, we've seen sticks and pipes. We've seen a whole range of things, not only presented at police but also thrown at police, and obviously physical violence too, which has resulted in a small number of our staff being injured.
Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers says today's operation started early this morning and says the injured officers were given medical support and later rejoined their colleagues. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says she's angered and saddened by the attack on democracy and New Zealand's values by protesters today.
There are words I cannot use in this environment for what I saw today, but I felt the same anger that I know many New Zealanders would have felt, witnessing the hurling of basically weapons that people were able to get their hands on, LPG bottles thrown onto flames. Currently, we have cobblestones being hurled at police. It is still a live event. I felt both anger at what I was seeing, but I also felt resolute in what I was seeing.
Jacinda Ardern says the small handful of protesters will not define New Zealand's response to the pandemic. Ukrainian military officers say Russian paratroopers have landed in the city of Kharkiv and attacked one of its military hospitals. Witnesses say artillery bombardments have been stepped up in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the southern city of Kherson has reportedly fallen to Russian forces. The BBC's Grant Ferret has more.
Situated on the mouth of the Dnieper River and not far from Crimea, with a population in normal times of 250,000, Kherson is a significant city. Russian troops have seized the port and the train station, and pictures on social media show a large number of military vehicles on the main square. A member of the local council told the BBC that Russian forces now controlled the city. Speaking from an underground shelter, he estimated that 200 people had been killed, many of them civilians.
The Energy Minister says Russia has used its position as the world's second largest oil exporter to weaponise energy by withholding supplies to Europe in the months before it invaded Ukraine. Megan Woods today met with ministers from 30 countries as part of an International Energy Agency meeting. She says they agreed to release 60 million barrels of oil that have been held in reserves.
This is why member countries such as New Zealand of the IEA do hold those international tickets and those reserves so that we do have the ability to intervene. And this is very much about sending a very clear message that there is oil in reserve, that price stabilisation is what needs to be achieved.
A warning has gone out to people who take part in the online sexual exploitation of children. A New Zealand-led international investigation has uncovered 90,000 online accounts possessing or trading child sex abuse material. More than 800 cases have been investigated in 13 countries, including New Zealand. Tim Houston from Internal Affairs says the operation's success should send a warning.
We will continue domestically and internationally with our partners to target these types of offenders. We have gained extensive insight into how these people work and think, which in turn I believe will make our efforts here and abroad much more focused and informed when we're targeting such people.
Tim Houston says the size of the operation shows how significant the problem is. And TVNZ admits it's flying blind regarding a government proposal to merge it with RNZ, but says it will support whatever ministers decide to proceed with. Cabinet last week considered a plan for a new public media entity, and an announcement seems imminent. Speaking to a parliamentary select committee today, TVNZ's chair Andy Coop told MPs he knew little about the plan but would be proactive and committed in supporting it.
You could say we're flying blind, but at the same token, we are awaiting a decision. I think we'll react quickly and proactively when we receive it. I think the shareholder has been, and our minister has been, as informative as he's been able to be.
TVNZ's new chief executive, Simon Power, says it stands ready to positively contribute to whatever is decided. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, Steve Brissett, a paleontologist who went over the sea to Skye and came back with the largest fossil of a Jurassic petrosaur. It's a giant flying thing, yet discovered. The BBC crowd science team was trying to find out who invented fire. And Gemma New, just appointed principal conductor of the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, the first woman and the first Kiwi. That's her in the band behind me. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Checkpoint next, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, partly cloudy, isolated showers about Northland, fine tomorrow, apart from isolated showers about Northland and the Coromandel Peninsula. Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country, also Bay of Plenty, a fine day. Gisborne to Wairarapa, a few showers about Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, clearing tomorrow afternoon and fine spells increasing everywhere. For Canterbury, the Kokoda Coast and Marlborough Sounds, cloud is clearing this evening and becoming fine. For the remainder of the South Island, mainly fine today. There's a possibility of a shower early this evening about the ranges. Cloudy periods and isolated showers about Bulla and Fiordland tomorrow. And for Rekohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Protesters are throwing bricks at police as the protest at Parliament turns more ugly by the minute. In the last few hours, fires have been lit on the lawn outside Parliament. Protesters have made makeshift weapons, pitchforks and shields as they launch an angry attack on officers. Early this morning, police threw the de-escalation plan out the window and moved in with force to clear protesters who've been demonstrating for 3 weeks. In the last few minutes, police have said they've completely cleared Molesworth Street of all protester vehicles that had been blocking the street. They've arrested 65 people and towed 50 vehicles. The protesters are all but gone from the Parliament grounds, but have spilled out onto the streets. Ane Anō, Katie Scotcher, our political reporter Katie Scotcher, joins us again. Katie, what's happening where you are?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, in the last 10 minutes, I've watched a car that has been parked here during the occupation by one of the protesters reverse very quickly towards police. Police were able to disperse, and then the car stopped suddenly and sped off towards protesters before slowing down completely. I think a couple of the protesters smashed the back window. I'm looking at the car now. It's empty, but there's the back window's all smashed. I've also spoken to a couple of people who say that they've been hit by sponge rounds by the police. When I was speaking to you before, we were hearing those loud bangs in the background. That I believe that's what those noises are. And he said he was all right. He just had a bruise on his stomach. But yeah, we've heard those kind of loud bangs and more frequent.
Katie, we can see in pictures that we're playing now, protesters appearing to hurl bricks or similar in the direction of police. And are hoses being used where you are?
So I'm at the bus interchange in Wellington. It's kind of, slightly maybe a street across from Parliament. For those who aren't very familiar with the Wellington CBD, I can't see too many hoses being used at the moment. Police are just blaring this very loud siren. Things have actually kind of settled down in the last kind of minute or so. I can't see anyone hurling anything at the police. It seems to have the hose has just started again, and it's firing at protesters who are kind of, going up to the police line and kind of taunting them and hurling abuse at them.
So, Katie, this rather unpleasant screeching that we can hear behind you, that is something that the police are piping out, is it?
I think so. It's been on kind of ever since the fires started on Parliament's lawn. We've been hearing this very loud siren kind of every few minutes or so. I don't know whether that's a tactic to try and disperse the crowd. And actually, the riot police are moving down towards the bus interchange at quite some speed now. So they're moving down the road between Victoria University. In fact, they're kind of running in my direction, so stay on the line for as long as possible. People are moving down the bus interchange at quite some speed. Police are moving very quickly. They have stopped running now and appear to have gained maybe 10 metres of ground, but the protesters have kind of quickly moved back past the bus interchange.
Thank you for the update, Katie. Kia ora e hoa. That is Katie Scotcher, our political reporter, live on the scene there at Parliament. We'll keep you updated with any developments. It is 6:10 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Across the Tasman now, where the Queensland Government estimates the damage bill from the devastating floods will be around $1 billion. In that state alone, 30,000 homes are still without power. Brisbane City is calling for volunteers to join a mud army to help clean up. But the disaster is far from over, with both Sydney and the Central Coast bracing for a hit. Sydney's main water source, the Warragamba Dam, is already overflowing. The Northern Rivers area of New South Wales is currently swamped, and the small town of Ballina was evacuated overnight, and fears are growing for dozens of people who are reported missing. Well, joining me now is the Deputy Mayor of Ballina, Ian Johnston. Ian, how bad is it over there?
Yeah, good afternoon, Lisa. It's bad, and it may get a little bit worse tonight at high tide about 9:30. But let's hope not. It's not as bad as Lismore. Lismore is our sister town, aims up the river, 74 miles by river, about 40 kilometres by road. Lismore is a city of 45,000 people. It's been literally underwater. All in the basin has been underwater. You may have heard of Lismore. It's a place that floods frequently, but this is the worst ever since recorded floods since white man's history. So it's been very, very bad. That body of water is moving down the Richmond River over that 74 miles, which is 150 kilometres, over the next few days. And as it comes down, it just swamps the other towns. We've got Coracai, we've got Woodburn, Broadwater and Wardell, and then finally it meets the ocean, or the ditch, as you people call it, at Ballina. That's a helicopter going over now. That's a Black Hawk helicopter going over my place.
So, Ian, how are they getting supplies around? You mentioned a helicopter's gone overhead, but are people short of stuff? I mean, how are they for food, petrol, water? And if they're cut off, how is stuff getting through?
Well, that's the worst thing happened is there's been 4 lives lost, but the second worst thing is that supplies are virtually impossible to get through at this stage, because Lismore, Ballina, we're all cut off the north, south, east and west at this stage. Lismore, the water has gone down considerably. They may be able to get some food from the west, but the west doesn't go anywhere. I mean, there's only other small towns of the west. There's no big supply centres which can bring, milk, bread, produce, etc. Petrol is a huge problem. The servos are nearly all run out. Milk is a massive problem. There's a lot of shortages, and there will be a lot more shortages. I'll give you an example. A little town north, I mentioned it before, it's Wardell. It's a river town. It's south of Ballina by about half an hour. I've been down there today with my daughter. We've been supplying food, all sorts of food taken from our little town, Alstonville, which is up high and dry on a plateau, and taking it to boats, and the boats are shipping it through the waterway down to a recreation centre in Wardell, where there's over 300 evacuees from the lower parts of town and from outlying farms, and they're all up there. There's been no official food drops, contrary to a promise this morning that the aircraft would drop something today. Not actually drop it, I imagine they'd land the helicopter and unload it, but there's been no supplies from anyone else except the volunteers from Alstonville. And they've done a wonderful job. There's all manner of food and baby nappies and, formula and milk and whatever we can get a hold of.
So, Ian...
Heaps of go on.
Are people still missing?
No one is officially missing, I don't think. But the people 3 people have been found in their upper regions of their homes in Lismore were not declared missing either until people went in there, because there's quite a lot. There's 1,000 houses have been underwater. People go through house to house and check if someone is there. Mrs. Block is still there, and then they're not there, and they go inside. And they're still going through that process now. Not all the homes have been inspected, so touch wood, there's no more. But
Ian, do you mean found dead in the roof space?
Yeah, I do. I've been found dead. That's what's happened to 3 of the people. They've been found dead up in the attics of the house, in the top of the house.
So they've gone as high as they can in the properties to get away from the water?
Exactly.
But to no avail?
Well, if 2 of them are elderly ladies, now how does an elderly lady get out of the house, up over the eaves and crawl up on top of the roof? It's absolutely impossible. So they've gone up there hoping the water won't come any higher. I spoke to a chap at Lismore on Monday afternoon. He's a friend from Ballina. He's a marine rescue person. He came back on a jet ski with a friend, and they said they'd just done a rescue. This fellow must have had a mobile that worked, and they detected where he lived. They jumped off the roof. They had tin snips and hammers and chisels and stuff. They took a big piece out of the roof and got the person out, and he was an elderly man too. Now, he would have been doomed if these people didn't find him, and they got him out through the hole in the roof and got him to shore. So there's been some pretty heroic stuff going on. There's been a wonderful effort from the emergency services over here. Absolutely wonderful.
We wish you all the best in the coming days, Ian. That is Ian Johnston, who is the Deputy Mayor of Ballina, and it's one of the towns that have been, swamped, and the whole area is, as he was describing there, by these floods, which have been absolutely devastating. $1 billion worth of damage, they're estimating. It is 16 minutes past 6, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, returning to Parliament now, where police have fired sponge rounds at protesters who have been forced out of Parliament grounds. RNZ reporters at the scene saw police fire a sponge round gun at people throwing rocks at them and have seen one of the rounds. This man told our reporter Katie Scotcher he was shot while trying to stop protesters from throwing bricks at police.
And then I heard this loud explosion. I was just being peacekeeping today. I'm a Christian.
And the police?
Yeah, well, I was down there telling the boys because they were throwing rocks at them, and I just said, "Can you please stop it?" And then I heard this explosion, and then I got hit with a is it an air bullet?
Does it?
A big bullet thing like that.
Does it hurt?
It really does hurt. I was like crippled on the ground for about 10 minutes and I couldn't breathe.
When did this happen?
This happened about 20 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. So they've got a high-powered air rifle around the corner. Now this is going to give people, people are going to start getting their firearms soon and stuff. And it's escalating. This is what they hit me with.
Now, there's a tip bin fire outside Vic Uni and a glass front door has been completely smashed. Police say they have completely cleared Molesworth Street of all protester vehicles that had been blocking the street. They've arrested 65 people and towed 50 vehicles. The protesters are all but gone from the Parliament grounds, but they have spilled out onto the streets. The Prime Minister has condemned protesters who attacked police and destroyed Parliament grounds this afternoon. Protesters set tents on fire and the Parliament Children's Playground was set alight. Now protesters are continuing to clash with police on streets nearby, with bricks torn up and thrown at officers. Jacinda Ardern responded to the fighting outside a short time ago.
To see the Parliament, your Parliament, our Parliament, desecrated in that way, and a children's playground destroyed by a small group of illegal protesters made me feel both angry and deeply sad.
Ardern says today's scenes will not define this country's response to the pandemic.
There has all the way through been an element to this occupation that has not felt like New Zealand, and that's because it's not. There has been foreign influence in what we've seen, maybe not in the traditional terms that we know it, but in terms of the disinformation that has been sourced out of other countries. That is something that we will have to tackle, but so too will other democracies, because it's a dangerous place when citizens are led into spaces where they believe so deeply in conspiracy theory that they act with such violence.
Te Pirimia's message to remaining protesters: she hopes they put down their weapons long enough to be arrested. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint. We're returning now to Parliament to our political editor, Jane Patterson. Jane, what is the situation where you are?
Well, I'm right down on the intersection right near the railway station, and there amongst a crowd of protesters who have been pushed back out of the street that runs between the Victoria Business and Law Firm. I don't know if you can hear it, but there are cars coming through tooting. Basically, people are just covering the intersection and cars are making their way through. But riot police have formed a line with shields looking at the railway station, sort of looking back at it at the edge of that street. There's still a lot of agitation here from the crowd. People are really angry about the way that the police have done this, and no one looks like going anywhere. Everyone has, from this part, has just moved across to the railway station and is causing a huge amount of disturbance.
Jane, to pick up on your point there, the Assistant Police Commissioner has told Checkpoint that the police are in command of the Parliament precinct. Has the problem just shifted?
Yeah, well, it appears to at the moment. So, this crowd is by no means under control. And in fact, there was a very, very scary moment at the Lambton blockade down. There was a big group of police and they turned fire hoses on the protesters. But basically the protesters advanced and nearly made it over the barricade, and there was a large public crowd watching too. Hundreds of police officers had to retreat and then come back with the help of the fire service and fire hoses. And they dispatched more officers out with riot shields out from Parliament to give backup. They really nearly lost control of the crowd at that point. It was a pretty dangerous situation.
Jane, what can you tell us about sightings of police leaving Parliament, armed police, and also regarding the use of sponge bullets?
Look, I haven't actually seen it, and it's quite hard to see. I mean, I'm standing relatively close to the police line now with the shields, but you can't actually see any weapons that they might have. There's certainly been talk from protesters about bullets being fired, people kind of commenting. One of our reporters has talked to someone who's who claimed they had been shot with a rubber bullet, but it's pretty hard to ascertain exactly what's going on here, Lisa. It's pretty chaotic.
Thank you for the update, Jane. That is our political editor, Jane Patterson, live from Wellington. Now, COVID has put another spanner in another sports competition. This time, it's the turn of Super Rugby Aupiki, the women's competition. The opening round of the new comp this weekend has been delayed because of cases within the teams. Sports reporter Clay Wilson joins me now. Clay, what is the situation here?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, well, the background to this essentially is that the teams were initially set to operate from their home bases, but obviously New Zealand Rugby saw the rising case numbers, and early last week they announced that the teams would be moving into a bubble in Taupo, and the competition would also be condensed into a 16-day window. Now, since then, obviously cases have continued to rise across New Zealand, and it was inevitable that some players and staff within these teams would be impacted through either testing positive or being a close contact of a positive case. Now, that's really reared its head in the last couple of days. The teams aren't yet in Taupo, but the number of people in isolation within each team has been rising. The Blues are the team that's most impacted, obviously based here in Auckland, so not a huge surprise. And the number of cases they have means they've had to withdraw from their game against the Chiefs this Saturday. They do say they should have most of their players available for their first game, which has been moved back to next Thursday. Now, the Chiefs, the Hurricanes and the South Island combined team Matatu, they haven't been hit quite so hard, and they will play an unofficial game of 3 halves this weekend. I did mention the competition obviously has been moved to start now next Thursday, moved back about 5 days, and the format has once again been adjusted. There's now going to be no final for this competition, so essentially each team will play the other 3 teams once, and then the winner decided on points after that. A little over an hour ago, New Zealand Rugby's head of professional rugby, Chris Lendrum, he spoke to the media and he had this to say about their decision, starting with the situation with the Blues.
We looked at that problem up and down, contemplated loan players, reserve players, but obviously when you're talking about people infected with COVID, that's challenging. And we came to a conclusion later yesterday that the way forward was to try to adjust the schedule. In the other teams, they've all had impacts, some of them potentially through the worst. The teams enter the bubble starting tomorrow.
And that is Chris Lendrum there from New Zealand Rugby. And tell us, Clay, how confident are they that they can get this competition played?
Yeah, well, in simple terms, Lisa, they're about as confident as they can be in the current environment. I did ask Chris Lendrum how optimistic they were that they would get the competition finished, and what he said was they would know more come Saturday this week. By that stage, most of the players will be in the bubble in Taupo, testing will be underway, and then they will be able to see if there's any ongoing change in transmission, I guess, within the 4 teams. If they can get past that, he thinks they have, quote, a pretty good shot at getting through with minimal disruption. Of course, no guarantees in the world we're living in, so we'll just have to wait and see and hope that they can get through these 3 rounds of play in this new competition.
Ngā mihi, Clay. That is sports reporter Clay Wilson there. OK, let's take a complete change of direction. Roasted, boiled or covered in cheese, no matter how you like it. Cauliflower could be off the menu this week as supply shortages pushes up prices. Some cauliflower hunters have seen it for sale for nearly $15. $15! Sally Murphy reports.
Higher food prices at the moment can usually be put down to supply chain disruption and labour shortages. But Jerry Prendergast from produce industry group United Fresh says the high cauliflower price can simply be blamed on bad weather back in November.
Not only did the fresh product that actually had been planted get washed out of their ground, but we also saw a problem because the ground was so saturated and that weather event continued for about a 3-week window, that many growers actually struggled to plant again. Hence, you had a gap of plantings of about 4 weeks.
That drop in supply has seen a spike in prices. Mr Prendergast says growers are selling collies for about $7 to $10 at cost price.
And by the time you ship it, pack it, bring it to market, pay the GST on it, hey, it's not far off those higher price points that we might see. The good news is I'm already hearing signs of cauliflower prices starting to come back in the upper North Island, and that's going to flow on down the rest of the country.
He says he understands people's frustration at the high price, but the solution is simple.
Don't buy them when they're too dear. I truly mean that. There's actually really good buying on salad leaf vegetables at the moment. The lettuce prices come back where it was really crazy. Tomatoes have been great buying. You've still got really good buying on sweet corn in the marketplace.
Like Mr Prendergast said, prices have already started coming down. Most supermarkets are selling them around the $8 mark today.
Abandoned fishing gear poses one of the biggest risks to marine life. But now some rock lobster fishers in southwest Victoria are trying to change that by designing a plastic-free lobster pot. The ABC's Daniel Miles has more.
It's 5 o'clock in the morning at the Warrnambool foreshore, 3 hours west of Melbourne. The sky's pitch black and it's cold, but still, which means it's a work morning for rock lobster fisherman Gary Ryan. Over the past 22 years on the water, Gary's seen plenty of changes to the industry, and now he's starting one.
It's like lots of things, you don't realise there's a problem till a certain amount of time goes by and you realise, shit, there's this problem we've caused and we didn't mean to, but it has.
The problem started when traditional tea tree and cane pots were replaced with plastic. However, beachcombers soon started finding plastic fragments from lost or broken pots scattered across the sands. In January, Warrnambool resident Colleen Hewson and her husband walked more than 100 kilometres of beach in a week picking up rubbish.
We collected quite a few what are called bait baskets and rock lobster pot necks. They're your red necks. So we do find quite a bit of them. But the problem with it, if they stay on the beach, is they can break up into lots of, thousands of little pieces.
When she showed some of it to Gary Ryan, he was shocked.
Yes, it's only after I met Colleen and she pointed out how they can break down into these, millimetre by millimetre particles, I realised we had a problem.
It was enough to spur him into action. In his brother's shed, Gary's been creating what he thinks is probably Victoria's first plastic-free lobster pot. He's one of 6 fishermen along Victoria's coast who's trying to create an eco-friendly fishing pot.
Oh, well, straight off I thought, well, to me it's unacceptable, like if there's other ways we can do it and get the same result, well, why not explore them options? So I've started developing, a steel-based neck instead of plastic.
Colleen Hewson reckons it's a huge step forward.
It's really wonderful when you get to this point and then all of a sudden things just go woo, and things are starting to change.
OK, the final words on the protest go to our listeners. This one on the text. New Zealand police, paramedics, firefighters, so brave, so focused and probably so exhausted. Thank you. Such a sad day. I'm lost for words. Peace and love has never looked so angry. Another person reckons send the clean-up bill to Marty Very of Red Stag Timber, Russell Coots, Gilda Kirkpatrick. We all know they've got loads of money, they say. That is pretty much all we've got time for. Now, the late news will keep you posted with all the developments throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Apopo. Tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up, they will have the latest from Parliament. They're also going to speak to university students around the country who are stuck in their dorms with COVID-19. Do spare a thought for them. Kaua e wari te atatero I a mātou kōrero. Heaps of good stories and video on our webpage. Do check it out. Kia pai tōpō. Have a great night. You deserve it. Thanks for joining us and we'll be back with you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko iwi ashton tēnei. The police are firing sponge bullets at protesters who've been forced out of Parliament grounds as the area is reclaimed after 23 days. Molesworth Street, which was previously clogged by protester vehicles, has also been cleared by police. But hundreds of protesters are still in the area and many have now converged on the intersection of Bunny and Featherston Street, with some directing traffic. There's also a small group at the bus exchange. The Prime Minister